Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling, as you see what's going on on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today. Well, hopefully everything is okay with my recording. I cleaned my computer today, so there's no dust, and it's, from what I can tell, a lot quieter, which is good because we're coming to warmer months now. I very much don't want my computer to just be going at full blast because there's dust in the fan or something like this. So hopefully it's fine. I had a bit of trouble with Elgato, it was not capturing properly, but it's resolved now. So hello everyone, we're now in Fawnhallow. It's 5:54 p.m. on Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. So as you can tell probably by today's title is I finally watched Flow. And if you're new here, then this is my video diary. This is not a comprehensive review. This is just one person's random thoughts after watching Flow. I watched it in the morning because, for one, I didn't even know it was still in the cinemas until, a friend was like, hey, do you want to do something over, we have a long weekend here in the UK because we have a bank holiday on Monday. And I was like, sure, should we watch a movie or something? And then he was like, oh yeah, did you want to watch Flow? And I was like, I didn't know that was still in movies, but yes, absolutely. And it turns out the only viewing of it was at 9:20 a.m. So we were like, okay, well, I was like, all right, let's do it then. And thus we did it. My friend, also very nicely waking up, I suppose, in the morning for us to watch it. I'm very glad I did. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I will warn you before I get into spoilers. I think it is best to be unspoiled, I think, of a movie. Because I think it's, how I'd say overall is, it's both a movie, which I think of a surface level is a cat goes on an adventure with its animal friends, and it doesn't need to have anything deeper than that. But I think a joy of it as well is also if you are someone who likes to try and think deeper into the imagery and the meaning, being like, what is this movie necessarily trying to convey? I don't think necessarily that there is a right answer to this, because I think it's deliberately quite, not abstract, but deliberately up for interpretation, and it's much more character focused. And the plot, in my mind, or at least the lore behind it, is not the main focus. In my mind, it's hand-wavy, but I think your interpretation could be very different depending how you look into it, because I read what some other people think of it, and some other people have a much more fantastical interpretation of it, and I think that's valid. I think that's very fair. So how would I describe it? It is basically, on the surface level, a cat goes on an adventure where, I guess so mild spoilers if you don't know the plot at all, but it's essentially not a silent movie, but it's a no dialogue movie where 5 animals essentially go on a journey, an adventure together, where a rampant flood comes in and destroys most things, and home as they know it, they all survive together basically on a boat and act like animals do. There's 5 main characters. There's and I was going to say titular, but it's not titular because the cat is not called Flo. But I guess we can call them Flo, why not? So we got the cat, Flo. We've got the dog, who's like a golden retriever, golden labrador. I don't know the difference. I always forget which way around it is. But yes, we're just kind of there to be nice and have a fun time. There is the secretary bird. She's got some great pizzazz to her. I'm trying to not give too much away. How do I describe it? Okay, the cat is more aloof and independent. The dog is kind of a friendly, he's very much just wants to get along with everyone. The capybara is very chilled, relaxed, he's very calm and put together. There's a ring-tailed lemur, and they are quite materialistic, I suppose, and attached to their things. And then there's a secretary bird, and she's very sort of protective and a little bit stands up for what she believes in, I suppose, in a sense. So that is the overall plot, and the notable thing is it's an independent movie essentially, made in Europe, made in animators from France and Latvia, I forget exactly. The story goes that there's only 5 animators who worked on this movie, which I almost kind of refuse to believe, because that's incredible. If that was only 5 animators to make something that good, that's insane. It might be maybe that's 5 main key animators, and then the rest people were like helping out on a commission basis or something, I don't know. But the first very notable thing that you'll probably find when you watch it is the fact that there's so many people who sponsored like the thing, like who were a company who are in part of production of the movie, where I said to my friend after like the third and fourth one, being like, wow, there's a lot of companies who helped produce this movie. And then I'm not gonna even lie, there's like 15 different companies who appear. I also didn't realise that weeds got so out of hand here. Like 15 different companies appear, all being like, oh yes, we helped contribute or sponsor and make this animation a reality. But don't let that sort of fool you. I mean, at its core, it is an independently animated movie. And it's very pretty. I think it's got a nice stylization to it. I don't think, like, if you're going in expecting a wild robot level aesthetics, I don't think that's quite fair to say. I think it's a lot more... I think it's stylized and it is very pretty in its own right, but I don't think you would look at it and be like, this is the high fidelity graphics most high fidelity graphics I've ever seen. I think my friend compared it to be like, oh, this kind of looks like a video game cutscene or something, which I don't think is a knock, because I think actually its benefit is the high point of its graphics is not necessarily the fidelity of the graphics, but more so the framing, the directing choices, which give it a nice sort of grand sense of spectacle. One of my favourite things that they do constantly throughout the movie is that they'll have a main focus going on and whatever's happening for the main animal, but then in the background you might see some smaller interactions from the other, animals aboard the boat, through one way or another, whether maybe like preening themselves, or just like curious about what the main animal is doing in the shot, or like having an interaction between each other. And at the core, because it's a dialogue-less movie, it relies solely on basically interpretations of the animals themselves. The animals themselves are not anthropomorphized in the sense of like a Disney movie or a Pixar movie. They certainly are anthropomorphized in the sense that they are much smarter than your average animals, as in they know how to kind of operate a boat. They don't know how to fix a boat, but they know the correlation between steering the rudder and steering the boat. But that's basically the extent, I suppose. And I suppose they have a sense of, in a language between them or whatever. It's like, I think someone I saw describe it best was like, it's like 20% anthropomorphized. And I don't mean in a physical sense, I mean in like a personality sense. So it's just enough that the plot will continue moving, but they still very much behave like animals. Whoever, like the people who made this movie, whoever was like an animation director on it, they must have done so much studying on cat movement. The cat is the most cat-like moving cat I've ever seen in animation. It's unbelievable. I don't really know how secretary birds and capybaras move, but I assume that also quite accurate. So there's a lot of communication which goes through how the animals are animated. So they still are pretty animalistic in a sense, but you can still get the vibe of what's going on. You can see their personalities. Like, you can see the cat is a lot more aloof and like distrustful. You can see the secretary bird at first is like much more curious and then becomes a lot more jaded as time goes on. And you can see that the lemur is much more materialistic and self-centered in a way, and the capybara is just very chill and wants everyone to get along. Is like a peacemaker, and the dog's very friendly and wants to just basically play all the time. Perhaps doesn't even understand the gravity of a situation in a certain sense. So that's it. Now I think we'll go into mega spoilers about what happens. So if you haven't seen it yet, I would recommend clicking off at this point and going to see it yourself if you can. But to me, I think the interesting part is the adventure is very fun, and it's lovely to see the cutscenes and how the characters interact with each other and the journey that they all end up going on. I think all their arcs are very tidy. I don't think they're like crazy, like there's nothing particularly deep about them. The cat, starts off very aloof and unwilling to move on from the things that they hold dear in their home, but eventually, comes to accept the group and comes to even go out of their way to help them selflessly. The secretary bird also has an interesting negative almost character arc, depending on how you look at it, where they start out very curious about the cat and then even being very generous to sacrifice food for perhaps one of their own children in the group to give to the cat instead, and then even standing up to prevent the cat from being attacked or eaten, I suppose, by the rest of the secretary bird pack. And then interestingly, her wings got broken because of it, like because she stood up against perhaps the discriminatory nature of the other birds, and then got abandoned by her crew. So she starts off being much more sort of like protective and caring, and then becomes very sort of goal oriented of like, we have to get to these mega pillars, essentially, like where all the other birds are going, and eventually, you know, rounds up her entire story by seemingly ascending to heaven after a very sort of jaded, untrusting personal development. And I thought that's very interesting. I'm not sure if I'd straight up say negative character development, but it certainly was a different arc compared to the others, where it sees they get more jaded. The dog having one about companionship and just want to make friends, and having that old dog pack, and then seeing that the dog, after like hanging out with the cat for a while, seeing that the dog's he goes back to join his dog pack, and then seeing how the dog pack sort of is a complete nuisance and ends up hurting one of his new friends, and then you see later that the dog pack just completely abandons him in general, and then I suppose it's all about building that sort of found family thing, and understanding the dynamics in relationships, and how, you know, toxic friendships, you can have very, you know, healthy friendships as well. The lemur being very materialistic, wanting approval from the other lemurs as well, and hoarding these materials, I suppose, is their way of being able to sort of establish that. And but they go on very much the shortest character arc, I think. They don't get too much development until the end, where they leave a materialistic materials behind to be able to go save their friend, essentially. And then the capybara is kind of like a much more mellowed out, where they just sort of have attachment to keeping the peace, you know, making sure everyone's happy and that sort of thing. And they have a strong attachment to the boat which they're all rescued in, and almost an unwillingness to leave it behind, and making sure everyone gets safe first, while they themselves are not necessarily safe, and then them trusting their friends to also help them out too. It's like these about 5 they're not complicated story character arcs or anything like that. I don't think they're trying to be to an extreme nuanced degree, but they're very much where I think everyone can understand them, like straight off the bat, just by watching what's going on. But I think interestingly is what themes are sort of being presented here. And I think overall, I would say that it's not necessarily that the story has grand, arching, really deep themes in it. More so that it's like a pleasant thing to watch. But I think you can extract meaning from it. As I say, half of it is in what the artist intended, and half of it is what the consumer interpreted from it. And to me, it's a story kind of about change, about cycles, and about moving forward all the same. Like how the water, at first I thought it represented like grief or loss, or perhaps even time, but I think actually the water represents change, if anything, or like change in circumstance, if anything. And how it completely like uprooted everything of the main cast, and like changed their lives irreversibly. Well, not irreversibly, reversibly, and then it sort of comes back again, and then changes the whale's life for the worse as well. Like this sort of cycle back and forth, and it really sort of felt like a death cycle to me as well. Just sort of like that endless grief which can come and go and come and go. I think it could represent a lot of different things, but I think more importantly is the characters' reactions to their journeys. The cat being one to eventually open, like, not embrace change, well, kind of embrace change actually. At first they're very scared of the water, and they're unwilling to leave behind their home. It takes a lot of convincing for them to even like leave the cat statue area in the house to begin with. Like they refuse the call to adventure, quote quote, the first time, and then do it the second time. And then overall, like at first they start like drowning within the water, then they start panicking. Eventually they sort of go in back out to being able to hunt in the water, and being able to provide using the water, sort of like acceptance, or like diving into change and embracing it until the water recedes, so once again, and then they see the impact it's had on others as well. And that's a very interesting thing there. The dog, as I said before, has a sort of story about companionship, really, and like who you can trust. And I think the lemur one is all about materialism and understanding what's most precious to you, in a way, or things which transcend a monetary or physical value. But capybara, I think, you know, those three, I think, sort of very much tidied up by exactly the meaning of the quest that they go on. I think the secretary bird's a very interesting one. because there becomes a very fantastical section at the end where basically they're in a big storm and then the rudder breaks on the boat and everyone else is just sort of like doing their best to survive and persevere, but the secretary bird just flies away with a broken wing as well as they can to get to that giant pillar which they wanted to go to in the first place. And then there's this very fantastical, whimsical sequence where it almost seems like they ascend to heaven or something and then just disappear. My initial interpretation of that was rather dark, I suppose, as I thought that the secretary bird had essentially taken their own life at that point, and that was their representation of them accepting the end, and how in the grand scheme of the story it was a representation of how change can bring about good change, I suppose, in the cat. But for the secretary bird, it changed and destroyed almost everything that they cared for and believed in, and how it can be a negative change all the same as well. And that's why the cat sort of goes, there as well. Been through such turbulent change, but the cat wishes to persevere on. It wishes to continue that flow of going, while the secretary bird doesn't. So the secretary bird sort of gives up and lets go of everything while the cat continues forward. I think, to me, that's what it represented. I didn't take it literally as a magical, fantastical moment happening, but I've seen other people interpret that as, yes, that is what it is. It's something like it had to be done as a sacrifice to stop the floods coming, or it's like a metaphorical, mythological sort of thing which ends up happening to, like mirror like the biblical like flood or something like that. I forget the exact comparison. And I was like, I can see that. I don't think that's how I would interpret it, but I respect your right to interpret it that way too, to be honest. And I find that a very intriguing thing. That's why different interpretations are so interesting, certainly. But yes. I just, as I say, interpret it more as it being like a representation of the cycle of death in a way. Life and death as it sort of gives and takes. And the grief that comes with it, and how it much more negatively affected the secretary bird, and while the cat sort of could grow from it in a different way. It's almost like a will to carry on, where all the other creatures sort of find their will to carry on, but the secretary bird does not. And I felt that was like, oh wow, that was like a very powerfully sad thing. But, it's up for interpretation. I think the whale was also a very interesting thing, where I feel like the whale, at first I thought the whale was much more like a representation of like nature and environment, or like some sort of guardian angel, the epitome of like good things happening to you out of control of other people or whatever forces bigger than yourself's actions. That's why it's sort of like a unknown entity. And then when the water recedes and the wave washes away and that is all revealed bare, it's sort of just like, oh, you can see the truth for what it is. But then I like the interpretation someone had, that is like, oh, it's more to represent how the water can be good for some. Like the flood was amazing for the whale. It has so many places it can go. It can survive incredibly well. The environment, its size that it lives in just quintuples even. But once it recedes away, then now, while it's good for the creatures of the land, the creature like a whale no longer has a place to go and ends up perishing. And I found it very interesting. That's basically where they rounded off the movie. Like, it seems on quite a somber note, if anything, that they go through the water recedes and everything, and then they find the whale beached and dying, and then they gaze into the pool and reflect upon things. Many times the cat gazes into water, reflecting and seeing just itself back, and finally at the end it sees all the companions it's made along the way. To me, I suppose, the sort of reflection into the water is self-reflection, if anything. And sort of, because I said the water can represent grief or loss or death or anything like that, that at the end, when it's reflecting and looking with all the friends, found family that it has, it's sort of just showing how the bonds can make it easier to go through. Now, at the same time, you might have a completely different interpretation, but I was like, wow, this is like quite a nice sort of emotional thing. I think it's a very nice thing where it has like surface level, it's a cat going on a fun adventure. You get like deeper themes where you get like these character arcs where you can see the development of all the things, and then of all the characters, and then you can go even further, being like, what is it saying on like a grander scale? And now I don't know if the artist necessarily wanted all of those things to be interpreted. Like, at the end of the day, art you can find meaning in a lot of different things depending on how you choose to understand or interpret things, and your own life experiences may influence how you understand things. But at the same time, it doesn't, I think, diminish it either. One thing I want to say, I think it's visually very beautiful. I do think Wild Robot does top it in that regard. But it still is a very, very beautiful movie. The soundtrack is fantastic. I love it. There's a lot of, I think its shots, like its cinematography shots were great. Loved that shot of a cat underwater and all the fish sort of swimming about. There's a beautiful one of them sort of sailing into sort of the sunset and the sun, and you can see the bloom of everything going along. The secretary bird at the top of a giant obelisk, I suppose, the tower was beautiful. Lots of very lovely, beautiful things. Soundtrack was fantastic. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I adore the fact that it also won an Oscar, because well deserved. I think it was fantastic. If we get more things which can sort of animations which can revel in the beauty of nature, I'm all for it. Wild Robot and Flow. I've never been compared a lot. I think they're quite different. I feel like Flow is more like an environmental, dialogueless conversation and the expressions found within the characters, while Robot's much more of a focus on, the dialogue and character interactions, and talks about parenthood in my mind and trust, while Flow is more about surviving and hope and grief and loss and the cycles of death. That's my interpretation. So I'm like, I don't really want to compare them in that sense. Like, why put two bad bees, as they say, against each other? They're both fantastic movies, and I adored both of them. Anyway, that's Flow. Highly recommend going to watch it if you haven't already. Probably by this point you've also already watched it, because I spoiled a lot of it. But on that note, I guess I'll round this episode up here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope we see each other again, but for now, it's our farewells. Until next time. Bye-bye for now.